For most of us, Antarctica is a ghost. A vast white canvas of 14 million square kilometers where the only sound is the relentless wind and the occasional groan of ancient ice shifting under its own impossible weight. It is a continent of glass and silence, a place of purity so white it blinds the eyes and so cold it stops the heart. Deep within the McMurdo Dry Valleys along the jagged face of the Taylor Glacier, I saw a sight that looked less like geography and more like a crime scene. From a crack in the pristine white ice, a river of deep crimson liquid was pouring out. It wasn't a trickle, it was a flow, a dark visceral red staining the snow and ice for hundreds of meters. My first instinct looking at the high-resolution images was one of pure shock. It looked as if the glacier itself had been wounded, as if the continent of Antarctica was bleeding. In a world of white and blue, the splash of red felt like a defiance of nature. Liquid water flowing in a place where temperatures regularly dropped to minus 50 degrees Celsius. A vibrant color in a world that had been monochromatic for millions of years. As I dug deeper into the records of the Taylor Glacier, I realized that the Blood Falls isn't just a geological anomaly. It is a portal. A window into a world that should not exist. You see, for most of human history, we believed that life required certain things: sunlight, oxygen, a connection to the atmosphere. But what I discovered at the Blood Falls challenged everything I thought I knew about the resilience of life. Beneath that ice, hundreds of meters below, where any ray of sun can reach, there is a lake that hasn't seen the sky since the dawn of the Pleistocene. It is a subterranean void filled with a brine so salt-heavy it refuses to freeze even as the world around it turns to solid rock. But it's not just water down there. Scientists have discovered that this bleeding wound is actually a messenger. Every drop of that red liquid carries with it a community of survivors, microscopic organisms that have been trapped in total darkness in a world without air for 1.5 million years. They don't eat sunlight, they don't breathe oxygen, they eat the very rock they are trapped in. They survive on iron and sulfur, living in a slow-motion existence that we are only beginning to comprehend. But the deeper I went, the more I realized this story isn't just about Earth. There's a reason NASA has spent years studying this bleeding glacier. If life can exist in the sunless, toxic hell of a subglacial lake in Antarctica, then why couldn't it exist in the frozen oceans of Jupiter's moon Europa, or in the iron-rich dust of the Martian poles? Today, I am going to take you with me. We are going to strip away the layers of ice and time. We are going to deconstruct the chemistry of this bleeding wound, explore the hidden lake that has been sealed for eons, and look into the eyes of the organisms that have forgotten what the sun looks like. Because the truth about the Blood Falls is far more incredible and far more haunting than the color of its water. This is a journey into the memory of our planet, a journey to find out why the ice is crying and what it's trying to tell us about our future. Thank you for being here with me. Let's descend. To understand why the Blood Falls exists, I first had to understand where it is. We often imagine Antarctica as a giant smooth ice cube, but there is a place called the McMurdo Dry Valleys that defies every stereotype of the frozen South. I've looked at the coordinates 77 degrees south, 162 degrees east, and this is the largest ice-free region in Antarctica. It is a world of jagged brown rock, endless gravel, and mountains that look like they were carved by an angry god. What fascinates me most about the Dry Valleys is its cruelty. It hasn't seen a drop of rain in nearly 2 million years. The air is so dry that any moisture, even your breath, is instantly sucked away by the katabatic winds. These winds can scream down the mountains at 200 miles per hour, stripping the landscape of every flake of snow. It is a place of absolute desolation. And it is here at the snout of the 54-kilometer-long Taylor Glacier that the Blood Falls makes its terrifying appearance. I tried to put myself in the boots of the men who first stood here. It was 1911. The legendary British Terra Nova expedition was in full swing. This was an era of wooden ships, wool coats, and raw human courage. Among them was a geologist named Thomas Griffith Taylor. I imagine him exhausted, his skin cracked by the freezing wind, his eyes red from snow blindness, trekking through this monochromatic wasteland of white and brown. And then he saw it. Emerging from the sheer white wall of the glacier was a frozen river of blood. To Griffith Taylor and his men, this wasn't a geological curiosity, it was an apparition, a nightmare. In a place where everything was supposedly dead and frozen, something was liquid. Something was red. Was the earth bleeding? Was it a sign? In the absolute silence of the Antarctic night, the sight of that crimson flow must have felt like a warning from a world they weren't supposed to enter. Griffith Taylor was a man of science, and he needed an answer. He looked at the red-stained ice and came to a conclusion that would be accepted by the world for the next 50 years. He thought it was red algae. It made sense at the time. We knew of microscopic plants that could turn snow pink or red in other parts of the world. It was a comforting answer. It turned a terrifying mystery into a simple biological fact. It's just plants, they told themselves. Algae needs sunlight to grow. It needs nutrients that simply don't exist on the barren surface of the Taylor Glacier. The algae theory was a shield, a way for us to ignore the much more disturbing truth that was hiding beneath the ice. It took us nearly a century to realize that the red liquid wasn't coming from the surface. It was being vomited out from the heart of the glacier itself. He named the glacier after himself, but the blood falls remained a silent enigma. I started to wonder if it wasn't plants and it wasn't blood. Then what kind of power could keep water moving in a world of minus 20 degrees? The answer lay not in the history of the men who found it, but in the geology of the ground they were standing on. A secret that had been sealed away since the dawn of the human race. The average temperature here is minus 17 degrees Celsius. On a bad day, it drops much further. In this environment, every drop of liquid should be as hard as diamond. Yet the blood falls continues to pour. It doesn't freeze. It doesn't stop. As I dug into the chemical analysis of that red water, I realized that what's flowing out of the glacier isn't just water. It is a complex, ancient cocktail that has spent millions of years mastering the art of survival. The first secret I discovered is the salt, but not just a little salt. The water flowing from blood falls is a brine, a liquid so saturated with salt that it is 3 times saltier than the Earth's oceans. We know that salt lowers the freezing point of water. It's why we throw salt on icy roads in the winter. But the brine beneath the Taylor Glacier is on another level. It is a super saturated solution that has stayed liquid for eons, even as the ice above it grew to be hundreds of meters thick. But as I looked closer, I realized that salt wasn't the only thing keeping the river flowing. There was something more subtle happening, something that felt like a hidden engine inside the ice. I learned about a phenomenon that blew my mind. The very act of freezing is what prevents the freezing. It sounds like a paradox, doesn't it? But here's what I found. As the water inside the glacier's plumbing system attempts to turn into ice, it undergoes a phase change. During this process, it releases a tiny amount of heat, what scientists call latent heat. In the confined, pressurized tunnels of the Taylor Glacier, this microheat is enough to keep the remaining brine liquid. It's a self-sustaining cycle. The glacier is essentially sweating out its salt to keep its internal veins open. I began to see the glacier not as a dead block of ice, but as a living machine with its own circulatory system. A system that uses pressure salt and latent heat to defy the brutal cold of the Antarctic exterior. But then there's the color, the question that started it all. Why red? It only turns bloody the moment it touches the air. The water is packed with ferrous iron that has been trapped in a world without oxygen for millions of years. The moment it exits the ice and meets the oxygen in our atmosphere, it undergoes a violent transformation. It oxidizes. But this realization only led me to a deeper, more haunting question. If the water is coming out of the glacier, where is the tank? Where is the source of this never-ending iron-rich river? The answer lay deep beneath my feet, in a place that no human eye has ever seen. I've always felt that the surface of Antarctica is a lie. It's a beautiful white mask that hides the true face of the continent. To find out where the blood comes from, I had to stop looking at the waterfall and start looking through the ice. But how do you look through a glacier that is 400 meters thick? In 2017, a team of scientists used a technology called radio echo sounding, a kind of high-powered radar for the Earth. I remember looking at the data they produced and it gave me chills. It wasn't just a small pocket of water they found, it was a massive interconnected plumbing system. Imagine a sprawling subterranean network of tunnels and reservoirs carved into the very bedrock of Antarctica. Beneath the Taylor Glacier, there is a hidden world of liquid brine that hasn't seen a ray of sunlight in a million years. For the last 1.5 to 2 million years, that water has been sealed off. While the rest of the planet went through ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and the entire evolution of the human race, this lake stayed exactly the same. It is a time capsule. I spent a long time trying to imagine what it would feel like to be inside that subterranean void. It would be a place of absolute darkness. Not the darkness of a night sky, but a thick, claustrophobic blackness where the very concept of sight doesn't exist. There is no wind, there is no sound except for the occasional bone-shaking groan of the glacier above. The pressure is immense. Hundreds of meters of ice are pressing down on this liquid pocket, squeezing it with such force that when a crack finally forms in the glacier's face, the water is literally squirted out like blood from a wound. The more I looked at the radar maps of this hidden lake, the more I realized that we aren't just looking at a geological anomaly, we are looking at a habitat. This reservoir, this subterranean void, is the engine of the blood falls. It is the heart that pumps the red brine to the surface. But a heart is only useful if there is blood flowing through it, and in this case, the blood is alive. I began to ask myself, what kind of ghost could survive in a place like this? What kind of creature has been trapped in this dark, salty, oxygen-deprived prison for 2 million years and still hasn't given up? The answer to that question is what turned the blood falls from a scientific curiosity into one of the most terrifyingly beautiful discoveries of my life. Deep inside that subterranean lake, there hasn't been a photon of sunlight for 2 million years. There is no oxygen. The water is a toxic hypersaline brine that would kill almost any creature on the surface in minutes. It is a world of absolute, crushing isolation. And yet, it is not empty. I felt a shiver down my spine when I read the report scientists found at least 17 different types of microbes living in that dark abyss. They aren't just surviving, they are thriving. These organisms have evolved a metabolism that feels completely alien. Since they don't have sunlight for photosynthesis, they've turned to chemistry. Specifically, they've turned to the iron and sulfur trapped in the water. They use a sulfate catalyst to breathe, and then they eat the iron ions being scraped off the bedrock by the massive weight of the glacier above. They are quite literally eating the mountain. They've created a closed-loop ecosystem that is entirely independent of the rest of the planet. If the sun were to go out tomorrow and the surface of the Earth were to freeze solid, the residents of the blood falls wouldn't even notice. They have mastered the art of existing in the cracks of reality. What haunts me most about these microbes is their relationship with time. Most life on Earth is constantly changing, competing, and evolving. But these organisms have been trapped in a stable, unchanging environment for eons. They are living fossils. I started to see them not as tiny germs, but as ancient sentinels. They are the memory of an Earth that existed before we did. And they are a testament to the fact that life is not a fragile accident. It is a relentless, unstoppable force. I found myself wondering how many other blood falls are there in the world? How many other hidden reservoirs of ancient life are tucked away in the crust of our planet, silent and unseen, if life could survive in this sunless, toxic hell beneath an Antarctic glacier? Then, the entire universe suddenly felt much more crowded. And that realization is exactly why NASA has made this bleeding wound in the ice one of the most important locations in the solar system. I used to look at this night sky and see a beautiful but empty void. I saw planets as cold, dead rocks and moons as barren spheres of ice. We've always been obsessed with finding another Earth, a twin planet with blue skies and green forests. Antarctica is not just a continent. For NASA, it is a planetary analog. It is a laboratory where the conditions of the early solar system are still alive. When I saw that red brine pouring from the Taylor Glacier, I didn't see a miracle of Earth. I saw a mirror of Mars. I started to understand why astrobiologists have spent decades in this freezing wasteland. They aren't just studying Earth, they are practicing for the moment we finally land on a world that isn't ours. I looked at the photographs of the Martian surface, the famous red planet. For years we wondered why Mars is red. We know it's iron oxide rust. And then I looked back at the blood falls. The chemistry is nearly identical. It occurred to me that if Mars ever had oceans, and we know it did, they might have ended up just like the reservoir beneath the Taylor Glacier. As Mars lost its atmosphere and its surface froze, the water wouldn't have just vanished. it would have retreated. It would have gone underground into the cracks of the planet, becoming a hypersaline, iron-rich brine shielded from the deadly radiation of the sun. I found myself shivering at the thought, could there be a blood falls on Mars? I began to see the universe differently. It's no longer an empty void of dead rocks. It's a vast cosmic ocean filled with Point Nemos and blood falls. We've spent so much time looking at the surfaces of planets waiting for a signal or a sign of green. But the real story of life in the universe is likely happening in the dark. It's happening in the subterranean voids, in the salty brines, and in the iron-eating metabolisms of organisms that don't even know stars exist. But as I sit here reflecting on everything I've uncovered, I realize that the blood falls gave me something much more than a scientific report. It gave me a new way to see life itself. For a long time, I thought of life as something fragile, something that needs to be protected, nurtured, and kept within very specific boundaries. I saw the Earth as a hospitable paradise and everywhere else as a deadly void. But the ghosts in the brine beneath the Taylor Glacier have changed that. They've shown me that life isn't a delicate accident, it is a relentless, stubborn, and magnificent force. As I bring this investigation to a close, I find myself looking at my own world differently. I look at the cracks in the sidewalk, the deep shadows of the forest, and even the dry, dusty deserts, and I wonder what else is hiding. What other ancient survivors are waiting in the dark for their moment to speak? The Blood Falls has taught me that there is no such thing as a wasteland. Everywhere you look, if you are brave enough to look deep enough, there is a story, there is a why. I want to thank you for coming on this long journey with me from the lonely coordinates of Point Nemo to the bleeding glaciers of the South. We are all explorers of this strange, beautiful, and sometimes terrifying planet, and I want to hear from you. After seeing what survives in the dark of Antarctica, do you still believe we are alone in this vast universe? Or do you feel like I do? That life is waiting for us in every corner of the cosmos? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one of them. There are still so many pages left for us to turn. Until next time, when we find another mystery to deconstruct, stay curious, keep exploring. This is Y Zone 360.